Hi everyone. This video will provide the lecture for week 10 of Theories of Career Development. In this lecture, we'll focus on spiritual, holistic, cognitive behavioral, and social cognitive theories. These are taken from chapters 14 and 15 of the Scharf textbook. I just want to note here that I did not assign chapter 14 as a reading. That was an oversight on my part, but actually there's only a couple of concepts from this chapter that we're going to cover in this lecture video. So it's optional for you. If you'd like to go back and read this chapter, you can, but chapter 15 you already had a look at in week 3 of the course, and if you did not read the entire chapter, then please do ensure that you read it as part of this week's work. So in week 3, we examined these two approaches to decision-making, descriptive and prescriptive approaches. And just to remind you, descriptive approaches are influenced by emotions, context, and life experience. They're seen as nonlinear, fluid, quite unstructured, with an emphasis on meaning-making and the client's interpretation of career events. The prescriptive approaches are much more structured. They have a step-by-step application. They rely heavily on rational analysis and emphasize matching traits, values, and occupations. In looking at the theories that we've covered so far, if we divide them into these categories, descriptive and spiritual theories are constructivist and narrative approaches, the social dynamic life designing and chaos theory, which we've covered so far. Prescriptive and cognitive approaches are models like Parsons, Holland, social learning theory, and planned happenstance. And theories that span both categories could be seen in Super's model, Schlossberg, Bridges, Hobson, and Adams. So it's not that you're necessarily going to, talk to clients about these concepts in any way, but rather you're just going to ensure that when you work with clients, that you're drawing in a balanced way from all different approaches so that we give clients a well-rounded experience in exploring themselves and making career decisions. To set the context again in looking at descriptive and spiritual approaches, the key principles here are that these approaches see work not as a mundane job, but a place where one's spirit can be nourished. Individual spirits can greatly affect their lives, choices, and type of individuals they become. So if you hear someone talking about their occupation as a calling, then we can see that as really a spiritual type of approach. And I just want to emphasize here that this concept of spirit is deeply embedded in many indigenous cultures. So this approach sees clients as trying to become more complete and more whole as they develop their spiritual self. So it views us as being on a form of spiritual journey throughout our lives in terms of our career. And spiritual energy is often expressed and worked through needs, values, and interests. We don't necessarily ask a client directly about their religious and spiritual beliefs. I don't think that that's included anywhere in the common assessment model, but it is something that we listen for. Clients will bring it up if it's important to them. And of course, some CDPs do actually work within an agency or organization where there is a spiritual basis. So this might be an actual area that you would inquire if you're working in that kind of a setting. Spiritual approaches or beliefs may or may not include a religious point of view. So people can be spiritual without subscribing to specific religious beliefs or a specific type of religion. And of course, from an ethical perspective, it's very important to be aware if you hold strong religious beliefs that you leave those aside when you're working with the client. It is quite unethical to try and impose any of our own religious beliefs on clients, as I'm sure you already know. And we want to be really cautious about our own personal framework when we're working with clients. Of course, most religions have quite lovely spiritual beliefs about accepting diversity and working with people regardless of who they are. So that can fit very nicely with our ethical framework, but this is really important that we be aware of the perspectives and beliefs that we bring when we work with clients and not allow those to intrude on our work with them. Now, in this chapter, although it focuses on specific theories that are descriptive or prescriptive, again, really all of our theories that we're looking at in the course could be thought of in this way. But three of the theories that are covered in this chapter, chapter 15, are Block and Richmond, where they talk about 7 themes, Miller-Tiedeman's life career theory, and Hanson's holistic approach. We're just going to get a brief overview of each of these, and again, I encourage you to go back and read chapter 15 if you haven't already done so, because it will fill in a bit more good information and context on each of these. So Block and Richmond describes 7 themes that individuals can use to better understand their lives and their career decisions. And these 7 themes are change, balance, energy, community, calling, harmony, unity. I think we can generally have an understanding of what these words mean, but I do encourage you to read up in the chapter 15, with the definitions of each of these. Essentially, these 7 themes emphasize career decision making as a spiritually grounded process of seeking meaning, balance, and connection in one's life and work. The second theory is Miller-Tiedeman's life career theory, and this theory distinguishes between personal and common reality. Personal reality is described as the individual's sense of what's right and real for them. And we can see this as being descriptive because it is quite open-ended. And you can also see an overlap with the constructivist and narrative theories because this is very much focused on the individual's interpretation of the meaning of their personal reality. It distinguishes this from common reality, what others or experts say an individual should do. So this is much more of a prescriptive approach. An example would be, using assessment tools, excuse me, which kind of use the same system to generate, let's say, a list of possible occupations for a client and suggesting these are the occupations you should consider. So that's more prescriptive as an approach. And some of the main concepts in this theory are that each individual is their own theory and meaning maker. Again, that fits with constructivist and narrative approaches. There is respect for the individuals and the individual's unique life process and experience, and we trust in their inner wisdom that, again, the client is the expert on themselves. Some of the other key concepts to flow with rather than fight your unique career development. So don't force yourself into a direction that doesn't fit based on what others say. And you can see, for example, in the case study that we've looked at in this course, that client kind of forced themselves into a direction that did not fit for them. They ended up in an office worker role that was really a very bad match. And this happened based on influences from other people rather than the client, deciding internally what fits best for them. We have to remember that clients are the best judge of what works for them. And remember that concept of the client is the expert on themselves. It also emphasizes encouraging clients to learn through their experience, so discovering what fits based on exploration. So we want to try and create those opportunities for clients, let's say through information interviewing and job shadowing, those types of things, and also learning from their own career experiences. Maybe they've really loved some volunteer work that they did in the past that they've never had that feeling, let's say, in a job. And can we look at that experience? What was important in that volunteer experience that really made them feel like that work had a lot of meaning for them? And then the third approach is Hanson's holistic approach. And this theory focuses on ways to make society a better place while helping individuals with their career concerns. So there's a real strong focus on how do we contribute to the world through our work, and can we make the world a better place through our work? And it views work, many of the same concepts I just covered, Block and Richmond, sorry, Block is misspelled there, and Miller-Tiedemann, and it focuses on societal context for change in life roles. So this model focuses on 6 life tasks, finding work that needs doing and changing global context. So really considering, where are the biggest opportunities available that could have an impact on society, weaving our values into work and personal roles. So, really considering how our values are reflected and met through our work and our personal lives, connecting family and maintaining work balance integration, valuing diversity and inclusivity, which of course is an ethical imperative in our ethical codes, managing personal and organizational transitions. So, being aware that, of course, change is going to happen and we need to manage those processes, and exploring spirituality, purpose, and meaning. So, helping clients to really consider these factors as part of their career development if they're open to it. Of course, some clients don't have inclinations in this way in any sense in their career. To them, work is just work. And that's okay. If they keep it kind of separate that way and these ideas don't fit for them, then we don't want to force that onto people. But most of our clients, most people do want to do work that has some meaning for them, that fits their values in some way. It's a real gift in life when you can find work that you're excited to do. You get up every day feeling like you're looking forward to going to work. So, switching now to prescriptive and cognitive career decision-making approaches. These are, of course, based on research in areas where thinking processes are used to find a specific correct answer. These approaches prescribe ways individuals can think that will improve their ability to make good career decisions, so often providing a structure for thinking things through. So think back on Parsons' model. There were those three clear steps for thinking things through and coming up with a potential list of occupations, and then following through in certain steps to explore and make decisions based on that list. Affect, which refers to emotions, and cognitive or objective processing are both important to career decision making when using a prescriptive approach. So, in this chapter, it talks about when we're looking at prescriptive or cognitive approaches, there are three basic domains that we focus on. First is knowledge, knowing oneself, obviously knowing one's traits, and about occupations or options, which can be seen as factors in the world of work. So, of course, this shows that trait and factor theories fit squarely in the prescriptive and cognitive domain. Decision-making skills. Individuals learn how to make decisions based on self and occupational knowledge, again, in a very structured way. And then it leads to executive processing, which is just thinking. Clients examine objectively how they think, feel, and act in relation to their careers. And then this can lead to making good decisions that are a good fit for the client. Couple of other concepts important in the prescriptive and cognitive area uh, is when we focus specifically on this executive processing domain. This refers to higher order functions. So we're thinking about metacognitions, being aware of thoughts and processes. So this is getting into the coaching area, but you might work with a client to, uncover their thought and belief that, let's say, if they've always had trouble with managers, that all managers are difficult, that every job they go into, they're going to have trouble with their manager. And we might unpack that and see if we can help them, find an occupation that, find an opportunity where that's not necessarily true, or remaining open to the idea that's not necessarily going to always be true. And it includes three main ways of thinking about decision making: self talk, self awareness, and monitoring and control. So, self talk refers to the internal messages one gives oneself about career choice and, of course, other issues. So, you might have a client who comes in and says, I'm really bad at job interviews. I just freeze right up. I go blank. I can't think of what to say. And then that leads them into kind of catastrophic thinking that I'm not going to be able to get a job because I'm so bad at interviews. So it's not that you're going to tell the client, don't think that way, but you're going to help them become aware that they're, talking negatively about these interviews, and help them to replace those thoughts with more positive thoughts. And some of that just comes from, let's say, with job interviews, more coaching, more education, developing their skills. And you'll see in a moment how we kind of do a feedback loop to help clients gain more confidence, and that by extension can help improve their self-talk and self-awareness. So, a third part of this is monitoring and control, knowing when you have enough information, and moving to an action plan and executing decisions. So, helping the client, let's say, after you've done a thorough job interview coaching process, mock interviews, and they've done a very good job, excuse me, a very good job of responding to the questions, that you can encourage them and say, I feel like you're ready. You've got enough now. You've done really well in the mock interviews. If they're still anxious, then increasing chances to keep practicing and reinforcing that they really do know what to do. So some additional key concepts, this is moving to social cognitive career theory, and this is what's covered in chapter 14. And there are just a few concepts here that I want to emphasize that are very related to everything I just said. So career development is shaped by cognitive processes, beliefs, and expectations. There's a certain amount of truth in the idea that if you expect to succeed, you will. This does not negate the real barriers that can be in the way for some clients who have maybe challenges like disabilities and so on. All the positive thinking in the world can't overcome biases that they might encounter out in looking for work. But people do pursue activities they feel capable of. And again, that kind of makes perfect sense. We're more likely to lean into things that we feel comfortable and that we feel confident we can do. Interests grow from confidence and positive expectations. So if someone does a job shadowing experience and maybe even gets a chance to try out a little bit of the activities in that job, and they have some, success, they may feel more confident about the idea of pursuing that field. Think about how you develop the confidence to apply for this program. Somewhere in your experience, that interest emerged and something gave you the confidence to explore that. And I hope that in being in the program now, you have positive expectations that you're going to succeed. And of course, as I mentioned, barriers as well as supports can strengthen or weaken career goals. And of course, you can play a very important role as a support for your clients. And of course, career behavior is dynamic and influenced by context. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a moment. Some important other concepts from social cognitive career theory are the idea of self-efficacy, beliefs about one's abilities to organize and carry out actions. And again, this is where some of the coaching principles come into play in what we do as CDPs. You may not necessarily be trained officially and formally as a coach, but you're learning some of that through the program. So practicing mock interviews with each other, you're kind of coaching each other and providing positive feedback to encourage each other in that process. Outcome expectations has to do with the estimates of likely consequences of those actions. So helping clients to see that if I've done lots of practice and I've responded to the questions effectively, I can have a reasonable expectation that I'm going to do well. And then set goals, setting objectives that guide the client's actions. So setting goals to actively go out and apply for jobs, to accept job interviews, and have a high expectation that I'm going to do well in those situations. I talked a moment ago about context, and there are two concepts in social cognitive career theory: background contextual factors and proximal contextual influences. So background contextual factors are the long-term influences, and they have to do with things like gender, culture, socioeconomic status, early learning experiences, family environment. All of that provides a background for the client before you ever get to see them. And most of these would be long-term influences, some of which, are hard to change. Proximity means close to. So proximal contextual influences are the ones that are happening around or near the point of decision. So this includes things like supports, encouragement, mentoring, and resources. What do they have available to them as supports? These are things you explore, as well as barriers as part of the common assessment model. Barriers might be things like financial limits, discrimination, caregiving demands, disabilities that limit the client's ability or influence it in some way to perform work. So there are other things that could be listed as both supports and barriers, but that's the general idea. And of course, as a CDP, you can play a really critical role as a proximal contextual influence, and you will provide lots of help to your clients, lots of support, as well as addressing and supporting these dealing with some of these barriers, which you find out as you do the common assessment exploration. So this model emphasizes the idea of learning experiences. So learning experiences shape self-efficacy. Question in the mind of the client when they're, let's say, approaching mock interviews: can I do this? Can I handle this process? Am I going to do well in this? The client success then shapes outcome expectations. If I do this, what will happen? Gee, I'm actually getting the hang of answering these questions. If I do well in my interviews, what's going to happen? I might have a better chance of getting a job offer. So this influences the client's interest in trying out this process. It helps to create more confidence in trying it out. So that leads to goals. I'm going to start applying for jobs. I'm going to set up job interviews, and that's results in actions, going to the interviews and performing as well as the client can perform, knowing that, of course, that does not always guarantee a job offer. So this is the feedback loop based on what I just shared with you. Once they make that choice, this leads to performance and attainment, hopefully. The performance may or may not go well as part of the job interview, and if the client has challenges, you want them to come back to you and talk about that so that we can help them to close any gaps and address anything that happened by strengthening their skills. If they attain the level of performance that is acceptable to them, this influences their self-efficacy, their sense of confidence that, yes, I can do this, and this influences their outcome expectations. They can begin to feel more optimistic about their chances as they go to interviews. And this creates new learning experiences. The more interviews they go to, the more strengthening of their skills will happen, and the more learning their learning will improve about how to be effective in these situations. So just to wrap up, a few important issues we need to focus on as CDPs. It's really important to focus on the client's internal decision-making process. Are they guided more by descriptive or prescriptive factors in decision-making? It's helpful here if you think about, are you more guided by these, which approach do you lean on more heavily when you have to make a major decision? Do you go, let's say, with your gut feeling? Do you create a list of pluses and minuses? Do you do kind of a combination? So really be aware, as you are with many other things, as you're going into this type of a role, of what your own preferences are, because we want to, of course, avoid forcing that onto our clients and saying, what you should do if you're more of a prescriptive kind of person, saying to the client, what you should be doing is taking a more structured approach. You can offer that idea. You can introduce approaches to encourage the client that do contrast to their usual decision-making style. So if they are tending to be quite open-ended, again, think about, excuse me, the case study of the client in this course. Up to the point in the case study, they had taken a pretty flexible, really very unstructured approach to their career choices, really allowing other people to influence them. So introducing a prescriptive approach to this client could be helpful. And we can do that in a very gentle way, saying, well, why don't we help you get a clearer sense of what your interests are? And I've got some tools that might help with that. We can build on the interests you've already expressed to me, but let's get a more complete picture so that we can ensure when you make your next career choice, it's going to be a good fit for you and provide work that you feel satisfied with. So you can introduce those approaches to contrast to the client's usual decision-making style. If some people are more prescriptive in their approach, and they, feel like, I must, the assessment tool told me I must consider this career, but I really don't like it. Well, let's do a more descriptive approach. what would you feel would match well for you in this career versus what might not match well in terms of your values? Let's just have an open conversation about that. That's certainly a much more descriptive approach. And it's, again, really important that you be aware of your own reality versus the common reality, and particularly to attend to the client's reality, including their cultural and gender issues. So again, very important from an ethical perspective that we work with the client where they are and that we respect their own beliefs and values as we help them make their decisions. So that's all for this lecture. Thank you very much for watching. And again, please let me know if you have any questions at all.